Last time we met, we talked about lies that cripple our ability to live better in order to become the competent and powerful women we were meant to be. One of those lies is that it just happens. That things just happen to us and we can't do anything about it. That we are dealt a deck of cards, a deck of events and circumstances, and it is what it is. If we agreed with this lie a long time ago, then we thought we had no choices. We accepted life as it was instead of taking action to change the negative parts. But the fact is, who we are and who we can become by changing things is an interaction between the circumstances we find ourselves in and how we choose to respond to them. Take a look in your workbooks at Lesson 2, starting with point B. Very little around us just happens. We aren't helpless because we are always a significant player in how we prepare for the experiences that will occur in our life. Here's an example. Last June, Hershey laid off 300 employees. So if this fact is true, the fact we aren't helpless because we are a significant player in how we prepare for the experiences that occur, then can one of you give me an idea of why this same event, Hershey laying off people, would not have the same impact on 2 or 3 different women?
I immediately think of one woman preparing by having put away a couple paychecks or months worth of paychecks as part of savings.
Okay, all right, yep.
Well, if I'm thinking it just happens, I probably wouldn't have prepared, for one. That's something I noticed right away in this point. It talks about preparing, but if we have that mindset, probably aren't prepared because we're just taking whatever comes our way. Our propensity may be to just sit back, not go look for another job, draw unemployment, and if it just happens, well, hopefully something will come our way. So we really put ourselves into a worse situation rather than being proactive, looking at the circumstances and saying, I need to get out and look for a job.
Right.
Is there something around here, to really start searching. So it can cripple us financially because it could really set us back.
Right. That's right. Same event, and just how you look at it is really. Any other thoughts on that point before I move on to C? Okay. C, what we expect from ourselves in life is what often comes true. If we approach life from the perspective of it just happening to us, we feel helpless. We will approach life without an achieving spirit. We will lower our expectations, and when we do that, it often comes true. If I had the expectation early in life that I wasn't smart enough to finish high school, I would likely not have worked as hard each day in school as I did. I had the full expectation that I would finish high school, and I worked to make it come true. I have a very well-used portfolio from work. It says, make it happen. This is a successories portfolio. Make it happen is what I expect of myself. Make it happen is quite different from the lie, it just happens. It's an action statement. It's a power move against the circumstances we find ourselves in. It means change will happen, not acceptance of what is less than the best for us.
Yeah.
Do you guys
I like when you said make it happen is active. Okay, the mindset of it just happens is passive. That's huge right there. So passive, active. And I had written down on this point, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It really is. Either way. Make it happen is self-fulfilling. It just happens will be self-fulfilling as well. And when I can think back over my life on the times where I have allowed myself to get into that mindset of oh, like it's not going to, and sure enough, it's not going to
That's
happen
true.
when I have that mindset. It just doesn't.
Right. Kathy, you had said something earlier about
Yeah.
your son.
Yeah, I just love what you just put up, make it happen. Because my son, when he was in high school, my oldest son, he would tell me, "Oh, I would just be so happy if I pass, if I get a D. I'll settle for that." And I would tell him, if all you're settling for is D's is all you're gonna get. So yeah, it's.
Actually, I'm laughing at that one because I have 3 brothers, but the one that is closest to me is very smart. But he was exactly that way in high school, exactly. So his passion and his love was racing motorcycles, and he was really good at it. So everything with engines and body shop work and racing, he just was spectacular at. So in high school, the one class that he got straight A's in was, the class where they were doing engines and all that. But all the rest, he just wanted to get by. And so it was D's and some F's. I remember him coming home and my parents, he's really brilliant, but he chose not to apply himself. And I think if you asked him today, he would say that was a mistake. But at the time, he just, couldn't see it. And it was just, yep, whatever happens, it's okay.
Yeah, my son, it's so funny because just like your brother, he's so good at other things. When it comes to drums or the guitar or singing, he puts his heart and soul and he makes it happen. He is very talented in that area, but when it comes to, he just settles. It just happens. Yeah.
Well, let's look at point D. Our interpretation or perception of events affects their meaning and importance to us. Let's take 2 athletes, okay? One is a woman running the 800-meter race in the Olympics, and the other is running the 800 in a high school race. Now, how might the perception or the meaning of the very same race be different to these 2 athletes in terms of importance? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it depends on their outlook. So for the runner who's running in high school, it could be the race that gets her to states, or it could be the race where she shaves off seconds of her time, and where she could break a personal record like PR. And for the woman who's in the Olympics, this is the world stage that she's on. So it's a make it or break it. But it depends on their mindset and how they perceive the importance of what the race is. I don't know, anybody else have any thoughts?
Well, yeah, the Olympics, that's your career. That's dollar signs, really.
Could be.
Yeah, it could be, on it. So that's a little different than in a high school, although, it could be a pretty big goal for a high school person as well. It could be a scholarship.
Dollars there, too.
Dollars there, too.
Yeah.
But it's a different level, and probably not, they're not thinking of it, I would guess, as a high school as being a career. A few might, but probably not.
So, same event, different perceptions. Sometimes we approach events in our life with a twisted and inaccurate perception. We are dramatic and we give too much power to what is really more like the high school race. We allow issues to nearly drown us rather than learning from them and shaking them off and looking forward to the next opportunity to improve. Let's look at point E. It's more productive to focus on the 5% of life we can influence rather than focusing on the 95% of one particular life circumstance that we cannot control. Now, last year, I and other family members were in the hospital realizing that Mom was dying. It was critical. She had very little time left. Now, I'm someone who appreciates being in control, beyond what I should be at times. And in this case, I had very little that I could control. Mom was going to die soon. That was the lion's share of the situation. What could I influence? Well, I could make sure that the medical staff were following her wishes, her living will. And believe me, that is hard when it comes right down to it, because Their MO is to do everything they can to save a life, but my job, part of my 5%, was to make them abide by her wishes, which was to let her go. You know, what else was in the 5% that I could influence? My choice of emotions. I could choose to dissolve in a puddle of emotion. There was that temptation. But how does that impact the situation? And who does that help? No one, least of all myself. I chose to do and say the things that I would not look back on with regret. It was good for Mom, it was good for me, and it was good for my family's support. It was productive to focus on the 5% of life I could influence rather than the 95% that I could not. Does anybody have any other points that they'd like to add to this 5%, 95%?
I really like your perspective, because the last thing that we're ever really prepared to do is to say goodbye to our parents. And so your ability to be able to abide her wishes and to get yourself settled emotionally, for everybody involved, I think that's a good perspective. I don't often look at life like that. I look at it with regret later. Oh man, I wish I would not have made such a mountain out of a molehill, or I wish I would have, been a little bit more in control. And I see, and hindsight is 20/20. I look at things from just backwards glancing, unfortunately. But in the moment, that must have been really challenging, and you were able to do that.
Yeah.
At this point, I don't think we stop and think about the fact that really a lot of things we can't control. This points it out nicely. 5% we can't control. The 95% that we don't have control over, we just proceed in a lot of times like we can control the majority. We can pretty much control all of it if we
the way I'd like to think.
Yeah, emotionally. But so that's interesting. Just getting the right perspective as we're heading into situations of looking at, okay, what really is it? I like that you pointed out, that you were able to step back and say, okay, what is it? Yeah. What is it that I can impact and influence, and then making the most in that area?
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yep. Let's look at point F. Our most significant contribution to any situation is the attitude we use to deal with life. We have 3 attitude options. Positive is the first one. What are some characteristics or symptoms, would you say, of being positive?
Anticipating that it's going to work out. Good.
I would say optimism for sure, joy, happiness, looking forward to the next day, the next opportunity.
So your face, someone who's positive would have a face that was just smiling. Well, like all 3 of you. These are positive faces that I'm looking at. The Be Successful speakers and authors all say that with a positive attitude, you'll be more healthy, less stressed, you'll motivate others, and you will be more successful. What's the second attitude option? Well, it's negative. What are some things that we do when we're expressing negativity?
Complain.
Yeah.
Or full of doubt.
Doubt, that's
Doubting.
a good one. Fear.
Fear.
The word melancholy came to my mind right away when I think of negative. It's easy to go there, because once we start thinking negatively, we can spiral downward pretty easily. It just kind of builds.
It does.
It really kind of sucks.
It is. Yep, it's just the opposite of positive. And it will leave us being less healthy, more stressed, and less successful. And the third choice of attitude is neutral. Now, I have no problem with someone being neutral because they're choosing not to take a side. But in this context today, we're talking about choices in contributing to a situation and our general attitude in dealing with life. So from that perspective, being neutral may mean you're ambivalent. You don't care. it can be a dangerous zone to live in if we use this attitude to be helpless and allow life just to happen. Let me leave you with this thought by circling back to being positive, which is the obvious best choice. There is one automatic or default internal focus where if we can live by it, we cannot help but be positive most of the time, and that is gratitude. If gratitude is our approach to life, we will find ourselves feeling thankful for everything, even the problems in our lives. It's easy to be thankful for the good, but why be grateful for the problems? Because problems are opportunities to grow and become stronger.
Thank you so much, Ruthie. That was really a great way that you helped us unpack point 1. We're going to move on to point Roman numeral 2. Believing that it just happens blocks out the bigger picture. And what is the bigger picture? This is it. There is a God who created us, and He has the ability He has given us the power and the ability to successfully respond to the circumstances around us. It is really, truly amazing when we look and think back on the things that just happen. God does not see it that way. He is very purposeful about the things that take us to new places and to new ideals about Him. But if we are passive and we don't understand that there is a God who wants us to successfully respond to life situations in a positive way, then we are falling back into the same trap of happenstance. These are 3 important points for you to understand about God. He loves and cares for us. And that, to me, does not sound like a passive response. When you love somebody and you care for them, you take care of them. You do things to remind them that you love them. And this passive approach to life means we miss out on the fact that there's a God who loves us. We may think, well, I don't know, it just is what it is, oh well, and we've said that numerous times. But there is a purpose for you. Point B says, God wants to guide, strengthen, and help us. Sometimes our circumstances happen for that very reason, to reach out to Him. He is a source of strength. He is a guide. He is there to help. This may be brand new to you. You may have never even considered some of your life circumstances in that way. The third thing I want you to learn about God is He wants to be the good father we may have never had. This particular point speaks loudly in my life because I grew up without a good father. It pains me to say it, but I have to admit, my dad was mostly absent in my childhood. I discovered during my teenage years that he had a mental illness. So he was schizophrenic. He heard voices, he saw things that weren't there, and he struggled a lot, so much so that when my twin sister and I was 3 years old, my older sister was 10, he left the home and he went down to North Carolina and he worked with family down there. And shortly after being down there, his mental illness caused him to take another man's life. And so he ended up in prison. So not only was he not there physically for me because of and even mentally, emotionally because of his own challenges, he made choices in his life that caused him to be physically away from me then, behind bars. And he wasn't able to see us. I did visit him a few times, but it just was so odd. I learned that I was filtering who God was through my natural father. So I saw God as not the person who loved and cared for me because my father didn't love and care for me. And I projected that emotional experience on God. And that may be something that we find ourselves doing when we believe life just happens and we think that God is insignificant and His role just doesn't matter. I also didn't experience a father who guided and strengthened me or helped me. He just wasn't there. I grew up without him. I grew up without my mom because of her mental inability to cope. And so my lens of my view of God was extremely skewed. It was very difficult to understand this concept. And I certainly did not see at the time that I was putting all of this together that God was good. I didn't see that. All I saw in my circumstances was I was alone and I don't have anybody and I need to figure this out all on my own. But I was later introduced to God, and I was introduced to his love and his care, and it made me think of all of the things that happened beforehand and wonder, especially after I had left the town that I had grown up in and moved into a boarding school, made me wonder, maybe he does care about me. Maybe he was moving me out of circumstances and out of the way of unhealthy people to take care of me. And when you start to look at things positively instead of negatively, or you're neutral, if you don't look at things in a neutral way, but you look at things in a positive way, you can really start to see the things that God wants to do in our life. So life doesn't just happen. This is where the rubber meets the road. How are we to respond to all that has happened to us? We have to be very thoughtful and very mindful of the circumstances and make sure that we have the right perspective. Since this is the first lesson that you're completing with discussion questions, I want you to notice at the end of this lesson there are a number of questions that you'll work through to remind you of some of the things that we discussed earlier. Take some time and think about your attitude towards the things that have happened in life and check and see where you fall. Does it just happen for you? Do you see yourself in a positive light in the things that have taken place? Or are you mostly negative? And then challenge yourself through these discussion questions to change your thinking, because it doesn't just happen. Thank you so much for joining us. We're glad you came. We'll see you next time.